Hi, Crystal. This is a new video that you really need to watch. I will be sending you an email about it as soon as I get it converted. I want to talk about the last two chapters of this week, which are hospital controls and charges and controls of expenses and so forth. There are a number of questions here. Which we'll look at briefly and do maybe a little discussion. I just want to make it busy. There are a number of issues that can be brought to bear on many of these things. Thing to keep in mind is that in recent years, hospital costs have been inflating at a much higher rate than even the general inflation in medical costs. And there are a number of reasons for that. One is technology, another is the actual construction and use of hospitals is very much modifying, and we're seeing a lot of changes in the way they're run. So let's look at just a few of these issues here, which is why some cost more than others. Simply because each hospital has its own different sets of charges. For instance, the cost of surgery to the hospital. Now here we're talking about hospital bills. Remember, we pay the surgeons separately. Sometimes we'll be paying the surgical nurses separately as well. So there'll be many ways that these are different. Some hospitals will charge a lower cost for a bed. The hotel charges, basically, as they're called, will be lower, and then you'll pay extra for everything, laundry, food, all of the other ancillary things that are done are charged for you. Others will have a fixed fee, higher, that will actually include all of those. So that's one reason that some seem to cost more than others. If we go into other things that happen in hospitals, you're charged for a surgery suite. Surgical suites cost a fixed amount per day to operate. The example in your chapter is $5,000 a day. That has to be spread across every surgery. So part of that gets charged against the number of surgeries and divided by the number of surgeries in a day or a month or whatever period of time that they are using for their accounting periods and their accounting methodology. So if that's $5,000 a day, and if there are 10 surgeries on a day, then each surgery will be charged $500 plus the other costs that go with that, the labor and everything else. On top of that, each surgery will have a fee associated with it. So, but that gets split by the number of surgeries per day, plus then the extra fee for each surgery. So it really is a complex method of accounting. Remember, accounting and reality are often not obviously related. Now, clearly, accounting and reality are related. If they're not, then we call those accountants and the people that structure those things inmates because they're committing crimes. But the accounting is a different form of mathematics, and sometimes it seems like it ought to be pretty straightforward, and others it isn't, because accounting rules, the GAAP, generally accepted accounting practices rules, are very much restrict what accountants can do. And part of that's to keep them from hiding costs or inflating income. or inflating costs and reducing income. So there's a lot of reasons that that's the case. Why is a hospital bill so hard to understand? Because it depends on, again, the accounting system. If you look at a detailed bill in a hospital, you're charged for your room, you're charged for any facilities, you're charged for everything that happens, every single pill, every single blood draw, every single thing that's done, meals, everything. If you really broke that down, and then on top of that, remember from accounting, your accounting classes, there's overheads that has to be distributed across everyone that's in the hospital, all of the sources of income. On top of that, the official charge or the official cost of something for a hospital has a very fundamentally different relationship with the actual payment that's made. Remember that when we have insurance, when we have other third parties, and about 95% of all of these things are paid by third parties, there's no incentive for the patient to go shopping. You don't go looking for the cheapest hospital. You don't go looking for the cheapest surgeon for obvious reasons. You want people that are the best to be messing around with you and your health and your body and cutting into you and other things like that. There's no incentive to doc shop. There are some things that where it's obvious. For instance, there's a hospital in Toronto that only does knee surgeries. That's all they do. If you had your choice and you needed knee surgery, that's where you'd go, because they will have seen everything. They will have seen all the variations. They will be prepared for anything that happens that isn't routine. Most places that do that are that specialized in their healthcare delivery are really ideal places to be treated. For instance, if you were having a heart attack, you wouldn't go to an orthopedic surgeon. Likewise, if you were having needed to have your knee replaced, you wouldn't go to a cardiology hospital. So there's lots of reasons for that. But that's not the way most of our hospitals are structured. Most of our hospitals are structured to be generalists because, of course, we can't predict what we're going to see. We have a number of these issues that make it very, very difficult because because we are trying to be all things to all people, and there's a lot to be said for the specialty, but there's also a lot to be said for the generalist. If you're out in the middle of Iowa, you're not going to have a major specialty hospital, and you will be transferred for really, really big things. They're likely to transfer you to someplace else. Let's see. Let's go back here briefly. We also have regional differences and state differences because of cost of living. There are all of this is real. Let's go back here. I'm going to go back a bit. Let's go here. Let's look at economies of scale for a moment. Economies of scale. We talk about economies of scale. We all know that it costs more. That you lower your cost of individual widgets by manufacturing a lot of widgets, and The difference is that it costs X amount to manufacture a widget. You have several things that you put into a manufacturing process. Your variable costs, which are labor and materials costs, and then your fixed costs, your overhead. The overhead has to be charged against the entire run of a product. So if you manufacture 100 widgets, you take your fixed cost for that period and divide it by 100. If you manufacture 1,000,000 widgets, your fixed costs are now divided by 1,000,000, and therefore the actual accounting cost of producing a widget is the only real difference is the cost of materials. And you get economies of scale then, because if you're buying large quantities of your raw materials, you get better prices. So we get those positive economies of scale, and those are incredibly useful parameters to deal with. This table here is an interesting, which is looking at data from the American Hospital Association. The average cost per patient day by size of hospital, and hospitals are measured by the size of their beds. There are very few hospitals of 500 or more beds, but we can see that when our low point comes in a sort of small-ish hospital, less than 100 beds, more than 50. And a large part of that, again, has to do with the idea of how we can have a reason, some of the differentials in cost. Again, it's overhead issues. When you start getting larger again, the overhead goes up because they're much more complex buildings. And we also know that. The diseconomies of scale come with basically managing a large institution. So we get a reverse issue. So the large hospitals, the larger hospitals generally cost more because they're more expensive and more difficult to run. They require more infrastructure. They require more staffing. So they're much more difficult critters to deal with in that respect. The hospitals, we have so we deal with some of these in a lot of different ways. This paragraph has some interesting things. Most 400-bed university hospitals have perhaps 100 beds general care, and then we have all the specialty stuff. Pediatrics then, and these university hospitals will also generally have the very expensive to operate things like NICUs and other specialized intensive care units to deal with. They also will have a lot of different specialized types of care that they do this. So what we look at is what we had when our kids were born. They were both born in Durham, North Carolina. Durham had the county hospital, which was I don't know how big it was. It was probably less than 200 beds. But we had the county hospital, which provided a lot of general care for just a broad range of illnesses, cheaper to operate, et cetera. But right down the road, we had the Duke University Hospital and its medical school, which had the very expensive types of care. Our second baby needed to be in the NICU for a few days. That she had to be transferred to the hospital. The transfer process is expensive, and it's not without risk. But so this actually adds to cost, but it also adds to the efficiency of the care itself. So the thing to think about here is that we have all of these different issues to raise. So let's look again at the questions. So we have a lot of reasons that this. Here we have the next question is, why would a hospital want to buy a new MRI if it expects it to be busy only half the time? And the hospital next door or a short distance across town, in the case of places like Durham, North Carolina, already has such a machine. Duke obviously had all of those things. But why would they do that? Well, because there's a cost of transferring patient in terms of paperwork and transportation costs. An ambulance ride is $1,000 plus, more these days. So there comes a point at which it's more efficient. And quite frankly, if you have an emergency situation, you may not be able to have the time to transfer someone. So a lot of things will happen. Computers and other technology improve efficiency, or will they improve quality and raise costs? There's an argument on both sides of that. So again, read through that, and we'll take a look at that. Regulation cut costs or cut competition. It hasn't cut costs. I think that's pretty clear. When inflation is at 9% a year in the hospital business, we can't say that regulation cuts cost. Regulation does cut competition because it's harder to get a hospital online. But it hasn't stopped them from happening. So let's take a look at quality and cost briefly. And quickly look at that. Some of the services get contracted out. It's been technology has allowed us to deliver better medical care and to do certain things. Technology, meaning the advances in the actual practice of medicine. Technologies like MRIs and CTs and so forth are clear. Computerized records has made the transfer of that information and the use of that information a lot easier and more efficient, and cut some costs, obviously. But new medical technologies are expensive, and so we have no impetus really to cut care, since insurance and cost reimbursement have really cut the need or the desire on the public to have a more efficient and cheaper system. Efficiency. This paragraph here, yeah, we have some interesting trade-offs here. Most people are going to say, I don't care if it costs me a little bit more money. I want the best care I can get because my insurance is going to pay for almost all of it. So we can see that that efficient delivery of better care can actually end up costing more. And of course, you have the difference between between the desire of the patients and the desire of the medical system to cut its costs. We have absolutely no incentive to cut costs in this nation. That's not going to change anytime soon. the efforts by the current administration to now get the entire Affordable Care Act um, declared unconstitutional are very likely to um, to fail for the simple reason that the very large majority of Americans see that there is a good value in the Affordable Care Act's provisions, and many in the party of the administration look at this and don't want to see any change whatsoever because they know that all it will do is cause a lot of problems in keeping their jobs. So there's a lot to be said about looking at uh, costs. Um, we'll go to chapter 10 now, which is long-term care. Long-term care is an area that you are yourself interested in, I know. And indeed, I suggest you concentrate on this chapter, really. Read this very, very carefully. Long-term care is very expensive. Do the elderly pay to be cured or cared for? Well, the answer to that, of course, is yes, it's both. They want to be cured of their diseases, but the elderly often have chronic diseases for which they will never be cured. A number of them. We have no cures, for instance, to arthritis. We have treatments that can make life better. We have no cures for things like Alzheimer's disease. So we have the elderly are being cared for, but how we do that is very, very interesting. Who provides the long-term care for the disabled elderly? Well, again, if we look at the statistics on long-term care, most people are not in long-term care for any real period of time because Medicare will only pay for 21 days initially and then up to 100 days with a huge copay. So you need to have some form of ability to pay, either Medicaid or long-term care insurance. The largest insurer is Medicaid and Medicare government. So the government is covering, one way or another, is covering the largest proportion of these. But who provides the most? Family. At least 2/3 of the people who are being cared for at home, usually by an adult daughter or daughter-in-law. But going through this ourselves, taking care of my mother-in-law, I can tell you this is a big strain, both psychologically and physically, on the family, thus causing more costs. It's really a place that we need to rethink the whole issue of caring for the ill. As people live longer, does that mean they're healthier and thus spend less on medical care, or more disabled and spend more? Living longer, and the statistics are clear. People are living longer and being healthier longer in their lives, but they still spend ultimately, in terms of at some point in their lives, much, much more of their assets and of the government assets on their medical care, because eventually they get sick. Now, everybody has largely the same idea. When my time comes, I just want to go to sleep and not bother to wake up. And the old joke in the insurance industry that the cheapest patient is the one that dies isn't really true, and it's kind of cynical, but it really is an interesting way of looking at things. If you simply keel over, then you've stopped incurring medical costs. Um, and so many people, however, have long term diseases, chronic diseases, arthritis, Alzheimer's, various diabetes, kidney disease. We're running, and the longer people live, the more chronic diseases they are likely to develop. So the answer to that question is complex. What do nursing homeowners compete for? Well, they really compete for, they don't really have much competing. We've been involved in trying to find a place for my father, um, and it's hard to find places that even have an open bed. And so what they compete for really is they would rather have healthier patients. They get paid a fixed amount of money if patients are on Medicaid. They get paid a fixed amount. They get paid whatever benefits they have for the long-term care. Um, um, and the issue of long-term care insurance, the um, they but it's quite clearly um, the less sick patients are easier to care for. They require less direct care. They require fewer resources. They don't need a lot of um, a lot of direct nursing and therapy care. They're also the people more likely to stay home. So it's a real mixed bag as to who they are looking for. Um, the um, the issue of cost control is very real here. The history of the nursing home um, uh, structure is really a mixed bag, and it is difficult to say exactly um, what the value of a nursing home is. And we all know that there's a lot of trouble with those. Um, the uh, they are businesses, and we've had a number of things go very poorly. We hear about nursing homes being closed. Problem with that is, where do those patients go? You can't just put people on the street who are immobile. You can't just throw people out. Um, so there needs to be some method of dealing with it. Um, we we talk about lower cost of care at a nursing home, um, but the lower cost of care is a mixed bag as well, because the way those prices are controlled is to really cut the costs of operating the nursing home. You cut staff, you cut services. If you've been in nursing homes, you've seen that there are times when the way the patients are treated is not very good. We go through a lot of expensive medications. Patients in nursing homes are often medicated um, to reduce their requirement or demand for services, and it really is kind of a mixed bag situation. Um, the There are a lot of questions here. Um, the um, Medicaid, how can Medicaid payments create an excess and a shortage of patients at the same time? We have the excess means that there are more people that are looking into it, and the shortage that um, is that fewer people are actually going into the homes because there are no beds. And so we have an excess in terms of lack of beds and a shortage in terms of not having places for or not having patients that are amenable to being in a long-term care situation. Let's go back to cured or cared for. And just mention the hospice situation. Hospice is supposed to be palliative care, comfort care, keeping people alive and comfortable while they are in the process of transitioning to the next world. But it's expensive. It can be, payments that are made by insurance and Medicare and so forth into hospice can be $5,000 a month or more. Certificate of need rules reduce cost or reduce access. They don't reduce costs, I don't believe. They do, however, create an access problem in that we have to be able, under the certificate of need rules, we have to show that there is a need, and there is little doubt that there is a need. If you go looking for long-term care facilities in most locations, it's difficult to find affordable and available. As I said, when we went looking for a place for my father, it was very difficult to find a place that actually had a bed available, that wasn't a rehab bed, which they weren't going to give. The issue of long-term care insurance is a complex issue. I just want to touch on that. It's something that's being pushed a lot. The problem is you have to buy it when you're young to make it affordable. And the real question is, if you can afford to pay a premium for long-term care insurance, why don't you just have a savings account and set that money aside, and then you have it when you need it. And if you don't need it, then of course it goes into your estate. But you have it when you need it, and why get an insurance carrier involved? That's a very, very good question. It's one of the struggles, because the older you are, when you start actually thinking, well, I might need, and you look at the statistics, and the statistics are always skewed. We looked at that one time and asked the question, the statistics are that 77% of us are going to need long-term care at some time in our lives. We're going to need to be in a nursing home or some other facility at some time in our lives. The problem is, the question that I've asked and never gotten an answer to was, what's the average length of stay? Because of course, once you're on Medicare, your insurance, your Medicare will pay for the first 21 days. And then they'll pay up to 100 days with you paying a significant copay per day, but nonetheless. So what's the average? What's the, 77% of us will need it. Well, all right. So my father went into a situation where he had to be put into a rehab facility. Medicare paid for it. They sent him home. And he would have not incurred any additional costs because they sent him home before his actual endpoint of coverage. I could never get an answer to that, and I could never then justify paying a lot of money for something that, to me, just seemed unlikely, because my suspicion, since I can't get that information, is that the average stay is significantly less than 21 days. So and again, you mentioned in your first week's discussion the idea of the wealthy. Let's take a quick look at this one. The wealthy elderly, can get into specialized communities. There's a whole article here, the whole system here is about assisted living and life care and continuing care retirement communities. These have had a lot of problems with being poorly run and possibly scams. Still, but it requires money. You have to be wealthy. Again, your point was that if you're wealthy, you can afford it and you do it. If you're not wealthy, what do? It's hard. It's hard to see what goes on. This article here, or this section here, talks about that. So let's take a look at the average income and wealth for different age categories, and let's just go right up here. Starting here, income. So we got the median. You know the difference between the median and the average. The average is just the sum total of all the incomes divided by the number of people who have them. The median is the one in the middle. Median is a much better example of what we call measures of center in statistics than average, because outliers have no effect on the median. The median is just the center of the data set. So if you have the numbers 1, 2, 3, 8, the median is going to be between 2 and 3, halfway in that. Whereas the average, 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 3 is 6, plus 8 is 14, divided by 4 is 4.5. So there's a significant difference. Now, take that with wages from people working for minimum wage, and then CEOs making, $5 million a year. You can see there are very few people at that level, and very many people at the median, at the minimum wage level. So median is always lower than average for things like incomes. There are other types of data where it may not be, but that's not what we're talking about. Same with wealth. The disparities here in wealth are tremendous. If we go under here, wealth is basically your net value, net worth. So let's take a look at this. We get up to people just under retirement, under the official retirement age, Medicare age. Our median income, $54,000. Average, twice that. Wealth, median, $250,000. Average, nearly 4 times that. So that's why median's a better measure. But as we get above that, then of course our salaries go down. Our median income goes down quite a bit because we're now retired, and we're now looking at our retirement income, which is often a fixed sum. So again, we have the disparities are that we get our greatest income in our middle years, but our greatest wealth comes and when we're older and when we've had all this accumulated value in our lives. So again, people at the lower end of the income scale can hardly afford these big continuing care retirement communities. So that's a good number here. There are lots of methods that we've looked at for trying to control cost. We've tried to control reimbursements to control costs. And none of them work very well. So you really probably just need to read this, study this. If this is the area of care you want to go into, this is an important thing for you to be looking for. Substitution means that that we obviously are trying to we're trying to look at cost, and this goes back to the sicker patients, or lack of extra payment for patients who need extra care, might mean that they cannot be transferred to a nursing home and therefore have to remain in a hospital for longer. While it should be clear that we move from a hospital bed to a cheaper nursing home and cut 90% out of the daily cost. The problem is that when we try to do this, we have to be careful that we're not moving people out that can't be cared for. So some of the hospitals have been doing this, hospital firms. The Medicare pays the hospital, whereas Medicaid pays for most nursing homes. So the state, and there's a push-pull here. The state doesn't want to be doing all of this. A lot of these things are excuse me, being covered by different parts of Medicare, and so this hasn't been able to do this very well. We haven't been able to substitute these potentially cheaper care. Because in reality, it's not cheaper. We look, yes, a hospital bed is expensive, but patients going into a nursing home and then bouncing back into the hospital because they were discharged too early actually costs significantly more. So it's we have a look at various forms of attempts to figure this one out. They've all failed. So the healthcare system, as we know, is in a mess. So I'm going to let this go. I want you to send me an email when you've seen this, and in this case, I want you to send me an email with the word Rome, R-O-M-E, in that to say that you've watched this. The other thing I want you to do is watch for some emails from me. I'm going to make some changes since you're obviously having a hard time finding the time to do some of the assignments. I'm going to make some changes in the assignments and give you some alternatives using some outside information that I'm digging up. So watch for that, because I really want you to get through this. I'm concerned that you haven't been getting the assignments done. And I don't want you to miss out. I hope things are going well. So please let me know that you have watched this. I will be sending you an email with the link. So have a good weekend, and I'll talk with you Monday. I sent you a link to Monday's class. I also posted it in Zoom session recordings week 3, since we are in week 2. Here is the link to the Zoom session for Monday, April 29th at 8 a.m. So I will see you then. Bye now.